We'll go ahead and get started then. So first of all, thank you all so much for tuning in today. I'm really excited to dive into this call and learn from Kate and just learn from alongside of all of you. So a bit of background information on our host. Kate is an experienced lawyer, strategic advisor, and senior executive who helps women entrepreneurs scale their businesses. Specifically, she works to promote inclusion of women in senior leadership and investment roles, to empower female founders with game-changing ideas, and to encourage investments in women and by women. And ultimately, her goal is to bring about change by fully embracing the aspects that place women in the ideal position to be leaders. And she does that by honing in on what inspires and drives their entrepreneurial spirit, and by being an example of what a collaborative culture can do for performance. So thank you so much, Kate, for taking the time to host the call. We know how valuable your time is, and we can't wait to learn from you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So today we're going to talk about scaling effectively. And if you do it right, not only will you grow revenues, but you will hopefully do it without completely and utterly burning yourself out, which is the goal and ideal. So a few things we'll talk about today. I'm just going to flash it on the screen for you. So we have it. If I can flash it on the screen. There we go. So a few topics we'll cover: time management, which is, important no matter what stage you're at; transitioning from a founder to a CEO, which is a very difficult transition and it happens as you're scaling; how to build the right team; how to engage your team, which is key to performance; effective leadership as you're scaling; and then a little bit on organizational structure as you're scaling. Certainly, if there are topics that throughout you want to ask questions about, feel free. At the end, we'll do Q&A. And if you have other questions, want to talk about other topics, happy to talk about whatever makes the most sense for you. So we're going to start off with time management. And we're going to cover a little bit about work-life balance, what this job looks like when you're scaling, burnout, which obviously comes down to a bit of self-care, setting boundaries, scheduling your time, and a few hacks, though there are tons on the internet that you can find from other founders. So in terms of time management and women, right? Women cite time management or work-life balance as the number one challenge, or the top three challenges they have when starting or growing a business. And that can be from, you've got kids, you've got household management, you've got elderly parents, your own friends and extended family, hell, even I'll go with dating. I mean, it all takes up time and you want to be able to balance that. But ultimately, my thing is there actually a balance? I don't think balance exists. I think what happens is at any given time, one takes more priority over the other, and it's a bunch of shifting at different times in your life. But the question whether, how to balance on some degree is about time management. And certainly as the job changes, as you scale, the job becomes much bigger. And so let alone work life, let's just talk about work time management, which is in and of itself a very challenging thing for most founders. And obviously a lot of founders end up in a situation where they're feeling burnt out. You're kind of losing your passion. The vision's getting a little cloudy. You've lost your energy. That makes you less productive, less innovative, less able to solve problems. You're too tired for anyone in your family or your work. And ultimately no one wins. So a little bit of that is self-care. There could be an entire session on self-care, and it's a very popular topic right now. But I think the basics of just thinking about eating right, getting sleep, getting some exercise, and then whatever works for you. Meditation. I read somebody likes to swim. That's not possible in New York, but whatever your thing is that brings you some calm and serenity, I think those are the things you have to think about. But as women, we tend to put our own well-being last on the list of everybody else. And so we tend to burn out You know, I don't want to say necessarily faster, but I do think we have a natural inclination to put everyone else before ourselves and lose sight of taking an hour a day to do something that we need to do. So in terms of time management, just a few thoughts on that. Number one, setting boundaries. I think this is critical. It's about setting expectations about what your needs are to everyone around you, being really clear what your non-negotiables are and how you do work and what you need. And, you know, you can say it respectfully, but telling everybody exactly what you expect from them and from the circumstance and situation and the environment. A big one for women, we're people pleasers. So we say yes to everything by nature. We don't want to let anyone down. We don't want to say no, but boundary setting starts with saying no. And I say this is easy for the things like, I'm in a big ramp up at work. I need to focus. I have all these inbound calls from people I don't know asking for, you know, let's just grab coffee. Maybe you put those on hold. That's kind of an obvious one. But the ones that are hard for me are, wow, there's a great event that would be perfect for networking for me, or there's a great event that I can engage with really smart, interesting women. It would be fun. I'd learn a lot. I should go. And, or somebody I really care about is asking for help. So those are the harder no's to say. And certainly don't always say no if it's something that is meaningful to you. But at different times in your career, if you're thinking about, okay, we're scaling, so we're bringing on 20 new employees, or we're launching a product this week, or some other major business decision, right? You should be focused on that. And maybe the things you want to attend, you can't make it to. And so you do say no to some of the really good things. And that's hard. I think that's one of the hardest things that women face. You know, there are tons of books written on setting boundaries, but I think that's one of the key ways to manage your time and protect your time. The other number one way that people talk about that are founders is setting a schedule and scheduling everything in, also known as time blocking. So take your calendar and put work, let's say calls, and meetings, family obligation, pick up my child from dance, whatever it is. Schedule everything in. Schedule a break in there. Schedule free time to think in there. Basically, block off chunks of time to do everything. Think about what's on your list. Estimate how much time it will take, and you'll get better at that over time. And slot that into, based on priorities, into your calendar. If it's not on your calendar, you really should not be doing it. That way you can manage and reflect on how much you're getting done and what's really important. Think about when you're most alert and energetic. So most people are most alert in the morning. So if you've got big challenges, something that's going to take a lot of thinking, or a longer term project that you're working on for the business, put some time in the morning to do those. So I'm a morning person. If I'm going to write something like a new blog or, you know, a talk or something, I have to do that first thing in the morning. After a little exercise, I got to get a cup of coffee and just block out the first few hours in the morning, because I know that's when I'm most effective. Calls, meetings, going out for coffees, afternoon, fine. That's less productive for me. I am not useful at all after 9 o'clock at night, so I don't block time at 9 o'clock at night for anything. And that's just me, and I know my schedule and how I work. But think about when you're most useful. One of the things that people debate, and I think it's okay to do a little bit, but you're having a day where you're just not motivated. You get up, you get to work, you've got a whole entire list of things to do, and you're just not motivated, you can't get going. Start with a few easy tasks that you can cross off your list. So cross it off, get a little momentum, feel good about what you're doing. But as soon as you do a few, move on to the bigger challenges. What happens is some people get stuck in those low value tasks, and all of a sudden it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you've gotten nothing done that you need to get done. And so I think it's important to maybe get a little momentum. Sometimes I need to feel like I'm accomplishing something at the end of the day. And so I mark off a few and they're easy, or I send back some emails in the morning. But I then quickly move on to a more important task so that I get some chunks of time done. Chunk your tasks, similar tasks, put in same blocks of time. It's important to not multitask. So there are studies that 2.5% of people can actually multitask. Women, we're great at it. We're proud that we're great at it. But when it comes to work, bouncing between tasks takes time. And the more complex the task, the longer it takes for you to bounce between them, because you have to resituate yourself in the context of what you're working on. And so you waste more and more time by multitasking. Try to be very specific and present on what you're doing. For many women, for example, even they say, I'm working from home, so I'm with my kids more. Are you really with your kids if you're on the phone, emailing, doing work, taking, working on something, versus dedicating time for those projects and then dedicating time for your family? The other thing is prioritize, which I know we say, and it's a very easy, prioritize what's important. That comes down to knowing exactly what your business objectives are, being really clear about it. And I'm sure everybody's heard of the 80-20 rule, but 20% of what you work on accounts for 80% of the value creation. So and 80% accounts for 20. And so all those small trivial things often seem very urgent. And so all of a sudden your attention is brought in 100 directions. But really think about the 20% that actually move the needle and fill your day with those things, and try to bunch the other tasks in a row in small chunks. There are some studies that 90-minute chunks are the most, for highest performance, people work in 90-minute chunks and then take a break. So try to limit an hour to an hour and a half per task, and then take a break in between, even if it's a 5-10 minute break. Get up, walk around. Don't look at email. Don't do something mind-numbing like looking at your phone. But that's usually a good amount of time to dedicate to a project. Distractions, everyone knows distractions are bad. They also take away from getting time done, but they creep in. So the obvious ones, your email popping up all day. Again, block off time to answer emails, maybe morning, midday, and late at night, or set a schedule that works for you. Set a time to check your work Slack channel. Don't check Slack all day long when everybody's talking. Those discussions that your employees say, oh, can I just have a minute of your time? And a minute always turns into 25 minutes of your time. Maybe bunch those in the morning, get everything done that employees have questions so they can do their job and get them off your plate. And then for the rest of the day, they'd have to wait and schedule it for the next day. Except if it's a huge fire drill, but be really cautious. A lot of things that's, can I have 5 minutes, turn into a big to-do that doesn't need to turn into that. And so it comes down again to really scheduling your time. As for hacks, like you can go online and there are many, but some of the ones that I think are important as you're really small and don't have the resources at this point to leverage your time is use freelancers. For specific tasks that you don't have skills in, use freelancers. They go to Upworks or whatever site you want to use to get freelancers. Use a virtual assistant. If you can hire an assistant, use a virtual assistant to help you manage emails and responses. Use a CRM to manage your contacts. And when you have somebody an email, canned responses it can send out for you to certain emails. Use as many systems as you can. Caveat, don't overuse tools. A lot of people just take on, there's so much really interesting tools out there, technology you can use to make your day easier. Don't overload with 100 tools just because they're available. Pick the ones that work for you, pick a few, and stick with those. Those are some of the big takeaways for time management. Again, it's going to plague you at every point in time. It never gets easier, but it does get manageable if you're really clear on when you're doing what's a priority, and putting your head down and doing what you're doing without distracting and bouncing around from ideas. Happy to take questions on time management or thoughts you have, if anybody's got any. Good? Fabulous. Look at that. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about, if I can get my screen to go, Transitioning from founder to CEO. I don't know if you can see that. I mean, mine shows it's in the middle, but seeing it as moving from seeing the business as your baby to an actual business, truly appreciating that the role changes significantly, talking about competencies that are needed, this fear of failure, and having a growth mindset. The role of coaches, mentors, leadership programs, and peer networks, hiring your team for skills gaps, and removing yourself from the day-to-day, which is really important. So that transition from founder to CEO is a very hard transition. I hate the stats, but 50% of founders are no longer with their company after 3 years. It just is a fact that it's not a necessary and easy transition. A lot of founders are ideas people and execution people. They are not managers, they're not leaders. And so they're not the best person to lead the company into that growth phase. But that's not to say it can't be done. It just takes very conscious efforts and awareness to make that change. And it does start a little bit from seeing this is your baby, it's your sweat and tears, it's your idea, you've put everything in, you know the market, you've researched it. And so it is the achievements it accomplishes are personal achievements, and it belongs to you, versus it becomes a business. The achievements are the business. You're working for the success of the business. You're working for your team, productivity, output. It becomes a different entity, and you really need to shift. And all of a sudden your role becomes completely different. Your role now becomes about a few things, in my view. It becomes about strategy, very high level strategy, long-term planning. It becomes about culture. Your job is to hire and develop your talent. It's to encourage collaboration. It's to set up systems and processes in place. And then you serve as the key connection between all your stakeholders, your internal employees, to investors, to vendors, to the market. You become that connection to all your stakeholders. It's a big job. Nobody has the competencies for all of those tasks, founder or not founder, just you're not trained to have the competencies in all of those tasks. So this fear of failure creeps in, and it's, am I smart enough? Can I do this? Will I let people down? You got investors, friends and family that might have invested, a team, will I be able to do this now? And I think there's a few things. In terms of the real leadership pieces of it, again, go find coaches, go find mentors, go find peer networks that help you learn from mistakes, go find leadership programs that you can do. And that might bridge the real leadership questions. In terms of all competencies, have a growth mindset. You can learn skills with hard work, with some learning, input from others. You can learn some skills. And so you will pick up some of these more managerial skills by just learning and talking to people. But for the very specific skills that arise as you scale, it's about hiring people who fill those gaps. And it becomes being really honest about who you are. What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And being, there are so many, I hate to say, so many clients that you do see they're not the right CEO because they're great at sales or they're great at tech. They're a great marketer. They came from a very specific background. They're great at it, but they're not great at being a CEO. And that's a very hard thing to admit. Now you can hire around all those skills and keep yourself as CEO and just put somebody in all those places. But it is expensive early on to put somebody in every function. You could hire somebody to run the entire business and focus on what you're really good at, which means making some senior hires, which is hard. Or you can, continue to fill the skills gaps and continue to lead, but just be very aware of what the differences are in being a CEO versus being a founder. The biggest thing at the end of the day for founders that's hard is remove yourself from the day-to-day. You turn out to be bottlenecks is what happens. I had a client recently, no matter how much we tried, put in place organizational structures, move people around, just every decision small or large, have to go through him. And it creates ridiculous inefficiencies, waste time when you're scaling, and just leads to a decrease in productivity across the board for everybody. It's hard. You're giving up control. You're giving authority to make decisions to other people. But if you make that transition to CEO, what bubbles up to you should be the really tough problems. I mean, somebody once said it in a way that sort of resonated, but right, you don't get the easy questions. Your day is all about figuring out the really tough stuff, and the easy stuff gets answered by other people. That is what being a CEO is about. And I think that's right. And I think we'll talk about organizational structure a little bit and making sure the right information bubbles up to you, that you can see the risks and the answer, but you've got to give up a lot of that day-to-day control. In the corporate world, there was an expression that it's like, you can be nose in, but fingers out. You can be kind of in everything a little bit and understanding what's going around, but take your fingers out, get out of the weeds. That's not where you belong. But making that is tough. And that depends on hiring the right team. No doubt about it. You becoming a CEO successfully is based on hiring the right team, which is something we can talk about. Happy for comments or questions. We can all do them at the end as well. My screen, I think, is kind of in the middle of this, so it doesn't help you. I don't know if you can see, but I'll move this over. How to build a team. It starts with breaking down your strategy, and we're going to talk about how you do that. There's this shift from generalist to specialist, which is hard. Senior hires are a tough decision for founders. Going to market for what you ask and need. Culture fit, diversity, and a hiring plan, which is very key, particularly as resources are scarce. So to hire the right team, you have to, again, it goes back to knowing your strategy, being really clear about what you are as a business, where you're headed, and how you plan to get there. Breaking that down into really specific objectives. So if your objective is, we're going to grow sales from 20 million to 100 million. That's the objective, right? What function do I need in that place? Obviously a salesperson, yes. What kind of skills and experience do I need in that place? If you can find somebody who's been at another company and scaled something from 20 million to 100 million, that's an ideal candidate. Doesn't mean you have to have somebody that's done it exactly, but it certainly is something you should put out there if that's what you're looking for. But being really clear on the skills and experience you need and being able to go to market with those and will help attract the right person if you're very clear about it. I read job postings all the time, and I think some are really great and some are very vague, and I'm sure they get piles and piles of resumes that they have to weed through, and they could help themselves a little bit by weeding. In terms of when it becomes very specialized in functions, the toughest thing for some startups as they make this transition from a small team to a more functional based team is that when you started, you hired a bunch of generalists. Everybody wore every hat, everybody was doing everything together, you worked as a seamless team, but now you need functions. And a lot of startups, sometimes works out, sometimes doesn't, move those initial employees that are very loyal into specific roles. They move them over here, they move them over there. They're not roles that they had a lot of experience in. And maybe they will rise to the occasion, and maybe you want to give a bit of leeway on that, but time is of the essence. But a lot of times they may not be suited for that role, and it's not helping you or them, keeping them in a position they just can't do. Does that mean sometimes you have to let go of people that have been there since the beginning? Yes, and that's really hard. You can try to keep them on, but for somebody who's got very scarce resources for who and what you're hiring, keeping somebody on that can't do a job and is just sort of there, you don't necessarily have that luxury. And that's a hard discussion, but I sometimes say, maybe you're doing them a favor. They could be awesome at early stage growth. They are generalists, they love that pace, they love that energy, and then they like to go on to the next one and do the same thing. So I think it requires some thought about moving from generalist to specialist and where your initial team really fits in at the end of the day. The other piece, which I touched upon, are senior hires, which most founders hire too late, a senior hire. There is a huge fear of making a mistake, or they do it quickly and make a mistake, and then they won't hire, they get rid of them and they won't hire again because they're afraid. They're costly. They're definitely costly mistakes. You take them on, you onboard them for a while, you get them embedded in the business, you spend time and your own energy on them, you rely on them, and then all of a sudden you realize it's not working. And starting from scratch is hard, and they're really expensive versus other roles you're going to fill, they're expensive. But they're important. To that point of transitioning from a founder to CEO, you need somebody else that balances you out. That can be a COO. There are different opinions. Hiring a COO too early can be confusing to your employees about who's really in charge. And for some, they are very aware that they are an ideas person and they're going to be out there and that's what they're good at, but they are not going to pay attention to the details and how things get done. And so from the beginning, they know a COO, which is their right hand, makes a lot of sense. You've got to be honest about who you are. If you think, hey, I'm a great leader, I can act as CEO, I'm in the details, I'm great, don't necessarily double up on a leadership position. So be careful when you hire a COO. The senior person could just be, I really need marketing because that's the most important thing right now to me. I really need a tech person because that's most important to me. And certainly wearing the lawyer hat in me, there's a lot of questions about when you don't have resources, how to bring on a team member and pay them. Do you pay them? And I can, whenever people have questions, I can answer some of the legal ones as well, which is what I like to be able to do for my clients. But right, it's equity, is it restricted stock? How do you bring somebody on? How do you keep them there for a few years if they're senior and you're giving them a lot of equity or you're paying them a lot? Sort of how do you put that comp package together so that you are incentivizing them to work, but you also have very limited resources? There are ways to do that. Culture fit. Once you get out there and you're saying, here is exactly what I'm looking for, put in that job description what you're all about. What are your values? What are you about? Hopefully somebody it resonates with, you've got a better pool that comes in, but be clear about who you are. I would say culture fit might be more important than necessarily skills and experience. Seen it happen. One bad apple is a bad apple. It can change your entire team dynamics. It can change decision-making. It can change morale. I had somebody once say, a founder say, I think about it like for every one I hire, I'm going to have 10 more just like them. And so if I have one bad, it's going to multiply. So make sure I really think they're a great fit. Your culture will shift over time when you go from 50 to 100 to 200 to 300 people. Certainly it shifts, but being really clear on a culture fit is most important. And ask the really interesting questions, whatever it is. What do you need to do your job the best? What superpower do you bring to the table? What did you like about your last job? What did you hate about your last job? Ask questions to get them talking about their experience and what works for them and how they interact as a team. Think about your values. Are you looking for enthusiasm? Are you looking for curiosity? Somebody who's really good with ambiguity and does not mind change all day long. They're not set in their ways. Do they need a lot of supervision to get things done? Maybe that doesn't work for the stage you're at. Try to get a sense of who they are and how they work. That'll be important. Doesn't mean hire the same person over and over again. Founders, when they start, hire people they know or friends of friends, right? You end up with a team that's very similar. And as you grow, that no longer works. You need to have diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, background, experience, gender, age, whatever. You need diversity in order to be innovative. And too often founders start growing with a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend and in the same ecosystem that exists. And, this takes me to a little bit of, being a female in this ecosystem, that we're often left out of that traditional network and how people hire. And so we don't get necessarily the same opportunities for jobs. And it's important that all founders kind of get out of that mentality of so-and-so recommends so-and-so, and then I'm going to just stay in this little tiny loop, because you don't get diversity of thought, and you get stuck, and nobody's asking the real hard questions. But once you find that team and you know what you want and what you need and what you're looking for, a hiring plan is really important, particularly because you probably don't have the resources to hire everyone you need. And one of the top 3 reasons that companies fail, it's about the team, yes, but a lot of it is about pre-scaling. So hiring, for example, when it comes to hiring too many people too fast, when the demand doesn't actually meet what you're employing, who you're employing, and what you're building internally. And so there's a dance that happens, right? If I wait too long, then I'm going to have a capacity issue and I can't be responsive to my client, and my clients, my customer, whoever it is. But I don't have enough demand for all these positions. And you really, without resources, it becomes very important to be clear what jobs you have to hire and when. What metrics do you have to hit? I need to hit 100,000 in sales to be able to hire the second person in sales, or I need to get to a certain place with my product or market traction to hire X. Lay it out very clearly so that you're not tempted to hire when you don't have the resources. Take into account, it takes a little bit of time to onboard people. So don't wait too long, but really think, okay, it's going to take a few months for them to get in the mix. This is what's on the plate. I hit this metric. I'm ready to hire. And again, use freelancers when you can't hire everybody in every function. Pick the functions that matter. Let freelancers do the rest of the work. We're consultants. Some consultants in each area, you can bring them on easily. You can pay them a retainer. You can pay them in equity as well, and they can do the role without having to commit. Lawyer me again, likes consultants because you can test them out for 3 to 6 months before you necessarily commit. So I like using consultants for very senior roles. I'll advise a client to do that as a way to test. And then if it's a good fit, you can turn them into an employee before you commit. But hiring plans are important to not get ahead of yourself when resources are not there. But once you've got that team in place, the right team, you're making the transition. The number one thing for performance is engaging your team. And so I will give some thoughts on that, which I can just give you a little bit of a heads up. And also these can be shared so people have a record. But we'll talk about, you've got to have buy-in for the vision and the mission. You've got to align objectives to roles. You have to set measurable targets and reward that behavior. Number one, you've got to empower your team. Tying professional and personal goals and creating cross-functional engagement will help you perform better than expectations. An engaged team, plenty of studies have shown, the more engaged an employee, the more they will outperform what their expectations. And it starts as a founder and a leader, number one job, tell your story. Keep telling your story. Get your employees to buy into the vision and the mission. Get them passionate. Get them committed and motivated. Tell your story in interviews. See how they react to that. Keep telling your story. Sort of as you scale, it gets thrown way in the back. Nobody's paying attention to it. And people lose sight and attachment to it. Live your mission and your vision. So anytime you're going to take an action, does it fit within the vision that we're pursuing? Does it fit within my strategy? Side note, I've seen this happen a few times and it's not great. When you're setting your mission and your values, you had a small team before you scale, work as a group to set it. A lot of times founders just set their mission and their values, give it lots of thought. They're very thoughtful about it, but integrate your team into the process because it engages them more and they'll feel more attached to it. So don't do it in a vacuum and then just present it as something you put on the wall and that's what it is. The other, once they're bought in, you're aligning the objectives, which we talked a little bit about, to their actual role, right? They need to see how their role fits in to the strategy, where their contributions impact the strategy. particularly this generation is really focused on that connection, but I think for anybody, they have to know that they're having an impact on strategy. And that is setting expectations and setting measurable targets. So you're hiring somebody, you say, here's the 30, 60, and 90-day expectations I have for you. And you set some target numbers, and when they hit them, you reward them. I'm not saying it has to be money. It could be a shout out in a team meeting. It could be a gift card. It could be whatever. It doesn't have to be money, but reward them in some way for hitting the target. Maybe you give them a new project that's different. It's something that acknowledges that they've reached a target so that they keep working to reach their targets. Sorry, my thoughts just escaping me. So at that point, we're back to empowering. I mean, I think the only way to engage your team is to empower your team. You hired them, you thought they were skilled, you thought they fit your culture, you gave them a very clear description of their job. Now let them do their job. They give them the space to do their job. Let them decide how tasks get done. Let them be creative in how they implement systems to get tasks done. Give them authority to make decisions within their function. You have to empower your employees. Otherwise, they don't feel engaged and they don't feel like they're contributing and that they have a place in the business. And that's all about your leadership style and in how you go about it. But empower, empower, empower. Tying, the other one I would say is tying professional and personal goals. Millennials and Gen X, Gen Z are saying that they care more about their professional development and personal development than they do money. So get them to buy in on the vision and give them ways to grow. So they accomplish something in their function, they take on more complex tasks. There's a new special project that comes up that's sort of outside their function. They express interest, give them some leeway to try something new. They're looking for ways to develop, and that's more important, and that will garner more loyalty by letting them stretch a little bit. And so, I mean, I think it's a lot of just letting them do their job. And that will let them, I think, engages, right? They buy into the vision and they get to do their job and they get to stretch themselves, and then they're an engaged employee and they're willing to outperform. You're also setting up a culture where you're saying you own your function, right? You make your decisions, and then they feel that, and there's more accountability. They want to own it. And so that creates more accountability as an organization, and that's something you want. And so it's a good cycle. But as you know, as we talk about empowering, I'm going to move on to just leadership questions. But the number one thing you need to do as a leader is empower your team. I say that's function number one. We can take a peek just so we can be on the same page. All right, maybe not. So effective leadership, I say, are three things. It's empowering, coaching, and listening. We'll talk about empowering and trust. Transparency is key. Creating a culture of fear. Silos are a big issue. Coaching, we'll talk about, and then listening is one of the most important things you can do as a CEO. In terms of empowering, we talked about it a little bit, and how you empower your team. You give them space to do their job. You trust them. I mean, a lot of it is the more trust you put out, the more trust you'll get back. And so the more trust there is, I would also say they rally around you more. And as a founder, you are not always going to make the best decision. You're going to go after something, you're going to make a decision. It may not be the best decision, but if you've got their trust, they'll rally around you and accept the decision and move on with you versus sort of fighting you on the decision. So it's important to build trust. I think one of the ways you build trust is be really transparent. Give them the information they need to do their job, but share with them some of the big wins and some of the losses. Give them a sense of the financials. You don't have to share every detail and have them all worried if you're in a fundraising crunch, but give them a sense of where the business is. Let them understand the bigger strategy and give them information so that, again, they feel part of the organization, and it builds trust among everyone. Coach your team. Your job is to coach. Like I said at the very beginning as a CEO, it's hire and develop your team. So encouraging your team, standing by your team, encouraging individual development, being the morale booster. That's your job. Sometimes as you're scaling, accomplishments get spread out and they take longer to achieve. And so people get frustrated. You're there to boost morale. You're the cheerleader. You're there to point out star performance. You are the coach at the end of the day for your team. You're not in the weeds with them, but you're above and you're coaching them. And you're listening to them. Number one, you're listening to them. If you want better decisions, better problem solving, better ideas, you better seek out those opinions. You should encourage discussion and debate. You should ask for feedback. There should be two-way feedback, absolutely. There was an article, Mary Claire or something, that the founder of Bar 3 talked about the quick expansion and growth of her business. And they hit a point where they kind of stalled and things weren't working. And so she sent around, finally, she hadn't done it the first few years. She sent around a survey to all her employees. And it came back with the nastiest commentary, not nasty, but basically breaking down that her leadership was the entire problem. And that it doesn't work. And she took it to heart, she says, and it was hard to take, but she changed her entire leadership approach and things turned around and the culture changed and they obviously have been successful and they've grown. But two-way feedback is really important. And millennials, Gen Z, they're looking for feedback. So it goes both ways. It can be one-on-one meetings with your managers. It can be a brainstorming session, pick small groups. They're more dynamic, do small brainstorming sessions. Hold a town hall for your employees as it gets larger. Put a suggestion box if somebody's got comments, if it's anonymous. Find ways to get their feedback and their input. One caveat or thought to have, and I guess I'll touch upon it in organizational design, but I'll touch on it then. I'll touch on it now. There's this notion, obviously we'll go right into it. Most startups are very flat organizations, and as you scale, you start inserting managers and roles and functions. They stay pretty flat. There is a notion that with younger startups, this consensus, decision by consensus, and that everybody at that manager level should have a say in the decisions. I got to a client that had 11 managers across the top. So 11 people with the CEO making every decision. That can become very cumbersome. So I start to think we need a layer in between. Maybe it should be 5. That's a good number to make decisions. There are some very smart, Apple does it a little bit, that are very flat, and they, when decisions are come, they are made by big groups. Big groups can be hard to make decisions. They can slow down things. Obviously, if you're doing it right and taking input from everyone and listening, then you don't necessarily need everyone to raise their hand or not on a decision and debate it in the room. You've gotten all the opinions. You've went and seek them out. But that can go either way. I think, people are different on that discussion. I think a pyramid, and now we'll talk about organizational structure, but structure is really important for efficiency. Most founders hesitate to do it at any given point. There is a theory that structure becomes really important at 50 people. I say I've seen it cause problems at 15, that 15 to 25, it's really important. Again, your flat structures, start putting in hierarchies. Be really clear on roles and responsibilities, write them out with the employee, make sure you're both on the same page. Often there's a disconnect between what the founder thinks that role is and what the employee thinks that role is. Work together on what that description is. Put in reporting lines. Structure is all about allocating, coordinating, and supervising. So who does what? How does the team work together in structure? And who is ultimately responsible for the decision at the end of the day? So putting in a hierarchy, reporting lines is very important, and a structure in place. You will have to, it goes back to that generalist, specialist problem. Go talk to your employees, the ones that were with you at the beginning. socialize it with them, get their buy-in. Don't just announce a structure. A lot of times they're now being pushed down and a manager's coming in above them and they feel demoted or their contributions don't matter as much. And now they don't have a straight line to the founder. And all of a sudden that, that causes some ill will. And so go talk to them. Don't just put up a chart at the end of the day. Get input on the chart from your senior executives. Bring people into the discussion. And in terms of structure, different companies, different structures, but the most common structure is to identify your functions that are most important, stick them across the top, and then create cross-functional teams that have representatives from each of those groups that are needed. So it could be a project based on your customers or product. And you'll have the people from each function that make sense on that team. If it's a product-based project, then the head of product of that product would take more of a leadership role in that team. If it's a sales issue with customers, but it's marketing related project, head of marketing will take the leadership role on that team. But the teams will work cross-functionally. Yes, the individuals on that team will report up on their points and what they're working on to their direct report as needed, but give that team some authority to make a decision as a team so that it can move ahead. So it's sort of, functions and cross-functional teams. That's the general way that companies are set up from the beginning, but certainly if you're a business that's like geographically spread out, then maybe it's, regional managers makes really a lot of sense. It will vary, but that's certainly the usual setup. Your setup will change over time, so iterate it, keep making changes. It will grow with you and let it grow. And obviously there's the other component of systems and processes that you can put in place that we won't get into, but it's all about automation, project management software. It's making everything as efficient as possible and making sure information is flowing the way it needs to get work done. And that's, the other half of organizational design. I will stop there and I will take any questions anyone has. Easy peasy. Okay. If nobody has questions, then we can.
Sierra, did you have a question? I see you your microphone going on and off.
Yeah, I do, but I don't think you can hear me.
Oh, we can hear you.
I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, so I was wondering, it's so easy to have a day or a little weekend retreat where you dig down into your mission, your vision, and your values, do picture brainstorming. Do you have any techniques for how to keep those top of mind as you start to get into the nitty-gritty and start to get overwhelmed by all the other things that pop up? How do you stay focused and keep that top of mind for your whole team to stay really aligned and clear?
So you're right. It's tough. And as the founder, that is your job at the end of the day, to stay focused. And I think as you grow, that's even harder because you get a lot more feedback from customers. You get a lot of people talking in your ear, and all of a sudden there are new ideas and you're following those and bouncing around. And so focus is the number one priority for founders to keep that vision. Like I said, obviously it's not just write them on the wall and post them up. But how do you live them every day? Is there a check that every time you make a big decision, you have to sit down and remind yourself and look at a sheet of paper and say, does this fit my values? Obviously when you're hiring someone, does this fit my values? But it is the number, it's hard to come back to, do people put aside a few moments in the morning and they're meditating and they rethink about their vision and they're manifesting that vision, and so it's with them in the morning before they start the day. I think it's hard. Either whatever you can do to keep it top of mind, whether it's on a sheet of paper in your office, if it's on your phone, if it's you tell yourself every time I make a decision I have to go through it, meditate on it. But yes, it's hard. You're moving 100 miles an hour and putting out fire drills and doing a bunch of other things, and all of a sudden when you're making the big decisions about strategy or objectives, I think that's when you kind of have to come back and say, is this in line? Because certainly you start doing one really well and then this idea comes up and you're like, let's go work on this. But you're scaling what you're doing well first and get that under control, and then scale other pieces of the business.
Got it. So you have to kind of develop your own system that works.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Others?
If there are no other questions, I'd love to do a quick round of introductions. And if you do have a question that you wanted to throw in there, you can just like say that when you're giving your introduction. So if we could just go through and like give a quick blurb about what you're working on and just a little bit about yourself, that would be awesome. Sarah, if you want to go first.
Okay. So I'm Sierra, and I'm the founder of Creative Edge Travel. So I lead experiential trips in Italy with groups of no more than 7 people, and also custom private trips. But it's all about getting off the beaten path, connecting with locals, and having more meaningful travel experiences.
Amazing. Lauren?
Hi, I'm Lauren Rosenthal. I'm calling in from San Francisco. I am working on Birdie, which is basically the anti-Yelp. It's reviews and discovery of things, restaurants and bars, or other things through your personal network rather than through strangers.
And I'm not sure who the 917 number is or if you're able to talk, but if you are, I'll give you a second. Okay. Well, this was absolutely amazing, Kate. I'm obviously not a founder, but I learned so much. It's just thank you so much for sharing everything and like getting super tactical and specific. It was really, really game changing.
Thank you all for joining.
Have a great day, everyone. The recording will be live so we can reference it later, and I hope everyone has an amazing day.
You too.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Anna.
Bye.